Two. Good evening. Thank you for those of us that are joining us here in person and then who are joining us on social media. Tonight is a public hearing for our Facilities Modernization Program, Phase 3. This is our third. We held one yesterday at School 34 and our first one at School 22. So to frame today's discussion, and right after today's public hearing, we also have a work session on Phase 3 that will be introducing some new information as well. But today's discussion is really going to focus on the overview of the legislation. We're going to talk about the purpose for tonight's hearing, give a brief recap of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects, grade level configuration, our academic connections, the schools that have been discussed under consideration thus far, timeline for Phase 3 decisions, and then any community feedback that for anyone here to speak, we would open it up at that point in time. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer to take us through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peluso. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to welcome Vice President LeBron, Commissioner Simmons, our two independent monitors, Dr. Jallo and Jaime Alicea, are here this evening, and members from the technical team, Steve Repholz from SWBR and Allison Shannon, and also Erica Abanazari from Watts, who have been helping us along the way to prepare for this evening. And then the chair of the Joint School Construction Board, Mr. Tom Richards, is here as well. The legislation allows for us to renovate up to 12 schools at the cost of $475 million. The team has been working diligently since early summer to review and prepare a final list of schools for our Board of Education to make a final review and a decision on at the December 22nd meeting. This evening, we're going to walk everyone through some past experiences in Phase 1 and Phase 2. We're going to frame some initial schools that the Board of Education has had conversations around that we've kind of elevated in consideration, and they may be able to take feedback, as Dr. Peluso said, in regards to the public and some additional conversation. First, we want to kind of take you back on a journey through Phases 1 and 2. We're just going to briefly show you some snapshots here of some of the schools. Here is Edison, and you can notice the refresh on the front end of it. That's makes for those dynamic instructional and academic spaces. And as we've indicated, our infrastructure is the #1 priority. So what's behind those walls are every bit as valuable as what's in front of those walls, but you can't beat the new look of Edison High School. Once again, another shot of kind of making a more modern looking space, and our green technology being able to make us not more energy efficient, but also more responsible for the environment. Our children's school, which was a renovated former #1 school, this is our pre-K play area. Once again, we took an older building and do a complete gut renovation of that building and turned it into a dynamic learning center. Once again, this is previous slide was the library media space, and as you can see, it still maintains the integrity of the historical significance of the building, but has modern amenities of a 21st century school. Excuse me. East is our next project. East has been a project in Phases 1 and 2. We've done a complete refresh, at the academic wings and CTE wings of the building. And as I said, the most significant part of this was a complete rebuild of the infrastructure at that school, while also maintaining the historical significance of that site. It is one of our most dynamic sites in the city, with an awful lot of space for extracurricular activities and some modern learning spaces and some areas for our students to be able to congregate and get together, not only socially but academically on the outside. This is #2 school. #2 school is another one of our 8 elementary schools we renovated in Phase 2. It was part of our double MCA initiative, where we were able to take our students out and renovate the school in full, as opposed to using a single MCA with a 5-year reset, which would in a sense have our students leaving the building on 2 separate occasions to accomplish the same renovated goals. Once again, another look at our #2 school, just a dynamic learning space that we've really done a complete refresh of that facility. Another look at East High School. This is our collaboratorium. Really a forward-thinking initiative that Dr. Nelms and his team put together, where we have a modern learning space, but also a collaborative space for our community to meet in. This has hosted a whole variety of district meetings, professional development, and community meetings. Another look at Claire Barton School, number 2. And you can see another initiative here is to not only transform behind the walls and a refresh of the classroom, but also the furnishings. So we try to blend some traditional furniture, but also looking at some new ways of organizing classrooms so teachers can teach, so teachers can utilize a variety of instructional methods. One of the key things we did in phase 2 that we're replicating in phase 3 is being able to have teachers kind of do some test runs on different technologies, but also on furnishings as we look to try to align our initiatives with our instructional program. One of our more dynamic and challenging projects was John Walton number 16 school. It was built in the early 1900s, and if you know that facility at all, we had to take the entire building down, except save more or less the facade, and rebuild it back from the ground. It was a wood frame structure, and what we've created there is frankly unbelievable in terms of the learning spaces inside, but also maintaining the historical integrity of the building and its place in the 19th ward. Another look at number 2 school, once again, another area of initiative. I know that's also a Board of Education significant priority that we talked about in our most recent budget deliberations. But wherever possible, we're trying to put in full-service kitchens. That is a priority for us. We may not be able to accomplish this goal in every building, depending on the size and some of the limitations we may have. But where we can do this, it's certainly a priority for us to do this. So new serveries, and certainly the full-service kitchen operation here in number 2 was where it was possible. Another look at 16 school. I mean, you just wouldn't recognize that this is the rear entrance to our community space. One initiative in phase 2 was for us to be able to set up our gymnasiums, where possible, our cafeterias and library media centers, so that they can be separated from the rest of the school to offer community access, whether it be for recreation or for meetings and whatnot, and then be able to also, without opening the entire building every time we want to have a type of community event. We also looked very much at the types of activities that are going to be in our gymnasiums to be able to use it not only for elementary instruction, but also for interscholastic athletics and practices, which we always have a need for facilities for our sports teams. Another look at East High School, and one of the reasons why we've invested so much resources there is that this is a campus that really will never be able to be replicated. We have plenty of space for our interscholastic athletics, but also a variety of areas like a ropes course, and this gives you a sense not only of the attributes of the building, but also the scope. When we talk about renovating a facility of this size, this is the key reason why it takes multiple phases with which to do that. The large number of students, but also the number of square footage and infrastructure that are required to put this building, not only take it apart, but certainly put it back together. And another look at number 16 school, you can see we basically built this is the gymnasium cafeteria entrance. It's separated from the school, but still maintaining the historical significance of the building, but yet with the modern amenities of what our students need in our community. And this is the inside of the gymnasium, and this is replicated at a variety of our schools in phase 2. Number 10 school also has a very similar construct in terms of what we with the small stage area, as well as as a gymnasium that can be used for multiple purposes. Another look at East High School. We talked a lot about the different types of instructional programs, which our Chief Academic Officer will talk about briefly in a moment. But here's another look at what some of our classrooms look like after the refresh. This is our CTE area, our culinary space, and that was in our F wing at East High School, and we've basically transformed that entire wing into a dynamic CTE location. Once again, I think the other part of this, when we refer back to number 2 school, is outside lighting, security. That's a significant initiative that we have also, as much as energy efficiency. We know in the climate that we're dealing with today, that security of our students and the safety of our students, staff, and community members is of the highest priority. So not only building our single points of entry with the state-of-the-art security access but also increasing our lighting and our presence with cameras and so forth on the exterior of the building. we also tried to accomplish not only making it a more secure location, but also continue to make it welcoming. So you notice the lighting here, although it's very, very dynamic on the building, also does very little to interfere with the neighborhood. So we're trying to be very, very conscious of the impact that we have on our neighbors. Many of our schools are really embedded in our neighborhoods, so we need to be cognizant of that. Edison Tech, once again, much like East High School, a significantly sized learning space focused on, one of the primary focuses there is our CTE programming. And as demonstrated here, this is one of our labs. And this shows what we need to do not only in front of the walls, but also behind the walls in order to offer the state-of-the-art technology that our students need to have. This is the broadcast studio, brand new in phase 2. As I said, we did some work in phase 1. We are balancing infrastructure work as well as work in the academic spaces along the way. So we're trying to improve program, but also we have to maintain the structural integrity of the building. Another look at the scope of the Edison site. Just to do the roofing alone there's 136 air handlers on the roof. So to replace those in some sort of a organized fashion takes a lot of strategic thinking. So this is not something that we take lightly. There's also quite a bit of site work that's been done. You see the new entranceway, new parking lots. So we're trying to once again balance work inside the building with a refresh on the outside and refresh of the classrooms. This is one of the showcase spaces, our auto labs. But you can see one thing we did here in this phase is we built the classroom inside the lab, so students can transition back and forth from the classroom experience to the hands-on experience, and then work their way back and forth in that environment. We also have a separate classroom space that we utilize there as well. So we are able to run multiple classrooms at once in the same CTE field. But with those students transition from the hands-on experience to the more academic part of the experience. Another area where we show that these are our community access points. Number 22 school was a building that we basically took out of mothball, the former number 6 facility. It's on the corner of Upper Falls and Hudson. And this is an area where we basically have made this school an anchor for the refresh of that neighborhood. There's brand new apartments across the street. And one of the significance of investing in these schools in our community and making them anchors there is that it becomes a neighborhood focus and a neighborhood initiative for our students. Another look at some of our dynamic makerspace and learning spaces. All of our elementary schools now have a makerspace, and which allows us for a real diversified academic approach. This became a standard in phase 2. For all of our schools to have a makerspace, but we also allowed some uniquenesses. So based upon what the school's academic programs are, we were able to modify those spaces a little bit differently for each one of our elementary schools, and we did 8 of them in phase 2. And finally, another look at number 22 school, and this is the entrance off of Hudson Ave. And this is a new addition, that wing that kind of went off toward the Upper Falls and Hudson with quite a few classroom additions, bringing our pre-K classrooms inside. This was an area that used to have transportable classrooms. Another focus of phase 2 was to eliminate transportables wherever the buildings we were going to renovate and move, which were primarily utilized for pre-K, and bring those classrooms inside the building. We were able to accomplish that at all of our schools in phase 2. So before I transition to our Chief Academic Officer, I think one of the anchors of our Phase 3 initiative was first and foremost to base our ideas and concepts on our Board Policy 4100, and our Board of Education affirmed that in early August with a vote. So we are focusing on modernization in Phase 3 on a pre-K 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 instructional program, which is significant not only for the consistency, but also having that as a foundation allows us to maximize resources and be able to better align our academic programs with our construction and facility modernization. It's my privilege to now introduce our Chief Academic Officer, Ms. Shanley Keeley.
Thank you. So I have the honor of sharing the academic connection to the state-of-the-art facilities we're presenting. To start that off, we're really looking at consistent programming, options at all grade configurations, a clear continuum of learning between and among zone configurations that allows students and family ability to participate and plan accordingly for options K-12. An ability to specialize programming. We have Montessori, IB, International Baccalaureate, Expeditionary Learning, Problem-Based Learning schools, and an ability to expand that programming across zones and continuums as well. And then also an expansion of career and technical educational options across all secondary schools. Consistent programming options. We want to make sure we expand electives, extracurricular and athletic options. You saw some of the amazing facilities, including gymnasiums with theater spaces, stages, flexible spacing, so the seating is flexible along with the desks, and sometimes even modular walls that allow for us to make larger or smaller spaces. Maker spaces, where we can continue to incorporate our new science curriculum along with some of the connections with CTE and science, tech, engineering, and math for STEM. Essential area spaces, which I just spoke of, art, music, gymnasium, so we really enhance those to be state-of-the-art facilities for our students. Athletic fields and facilities to be state-of-the-art, so we can be very rich competitors. And then outdoor learning spaces, so we can extend the learning beyond the classroom walls and continue to do some of that exploratory learning. Clear continuums, or looking at an expansion and an alignment of bilingual programming to allow for clear pathways for learning, not only bilingual, but also exceptional education classrooms that support long-term educational planning options. And then improved secondary school programming. We have initiative in middle school programming. A grade configuration of 7-8 is not a small feat to move in our district, and so we're really strategically organizing some thinking and planning around what that looks like with American Middle Level Educators Association, increasing programming and choice, and also this really includes a lot of culture and community, curriculum, instruction and assessment, leadership and organization in that middle level that'll help bridge the gap from the pre-K to 6 program into the high school 9-12 program. Some of the things and staples of AMLE is making sure that we are responsive, that the work that we're delivering and instructing to students is challenging, that it's empowering, it's equitable, and it's engaging, and really looking to make sure that we have that program right at 7th and 8th grade to address adolescent learners, but also to ensure that we're bridging that gap from pre-K to 6 through to the high school. So high school programming looks like options for bilingual and special education with supports across all buildings, making sure we increase the career and tech ed, expanding that through all the high schools and different pathways that are included, and we're working on increasing pathways by 2 per year at this point. An addition of driver's ed courses at all high schools, so all students at every high school will have that opportunity to take driver's ed. Continuing with specialized application and choice processes in the high school, so students can select school of choice based on the programming that is offered in each building. And then an implementation of freshman academy across the board, ensuring that we get our freshmen in the door and get them on track right away, and that they are ready to be successful not only for the rest of their high school career and graduate on time, but also be productive citizens. And then the last here is just a recap of specialized programming for Montessori, expeditionary learning, problem-based learning in multiple campuses across RCSD. And then an increased access for students to develop skills, talents, and support strong school-based connections. And I'm turning it back over to the Chief Operating Officer, Mike Schmidt.
Okay, I was remiss earlier, I did not introduce, we have two commissioners that have joined us also. Commissioner Adams is here at the dais, and then Commissioner Malloy has also joined us online, so I don't want to leave anybody out this evening. I like my job. Also in phase 3, we have a couple other areas that we want to discuss here. So our process has been since early June to look at this in terms of a couple different steps. One is to look at, which is a requirement, to do a test fit for all of our schools, including the schools that are under significant consideration for renovation. We worked with our academic program, as Shani alluded earlier, in terms of developing a core model. And we had worked with our Board of Education and shared that information at our July work session. It basically outlines what is essential that we believe to have in our buildings, and then we overlay that core model with the elementary schools and secondary schools, with the understanding that it's aspirational on some levels, that we may not be able to get everything that we would like, because infrastructure is our priority, but we also need to know where we are a little bit short, so we can make some other accommodations or modifications where we need to. Student enrollment is another significant aspect of this. We have to make sure that we are aligning our building inventory and our programming with our student enrollment, which is so that's a requirement of our Phase 3 master plan submission. Estimates, our cost estimates, really obviously are essential, and $475 million sounds like a tremendous amount of money, which it is. But in this environment, with the variety of challenges that we have, it doesn't quite go as far as it probably did when we were first under consideration. So we need to be very focused and strategic in regards to how we utilize and expend those resources. And then our instructional space review, that is another terminology that we use with special education. That outlines how our buildings are utilized and how we appropriately put in place our special education program, not only facilities-wise, but academic-wise. We are required to put together an instructional space review, or otherwise known as an ISR, for every one of the buildings that we are renovating, and is to reflect what the building will look like in terms of special education programming when it's fully renovated. And then finally, and the last piece of this puzzle is a building condition survey. We are very focused not to use acronyms this evening, but it will be also known as a BCS. We were able to move that forward with a board resolution in July. That will what that will do, and its requirement from the state of New York, it drives not only our modernization program work, but also our capital work on an annual basis. That building condition survey is done at every one of our facilities. SWBR was awarded the contract after bid, and that work really began in July. We're doing a review. We focused on the schools that the board gave us some moved or elevated to significance earlier. We're starting with those schools, and then the schools that are under more advanced consideration. And then we are required to look at every single building in the school district. Want to quickly review just the buildings that have been elevated for that significance. The first is our Douglas campus. It is going to be the home for a 7-8 academic program, and is one of the attributes there is certainly the large campus space and plenty of room for extracurricular programming. But one of the areas that we really need to invest our resources in is, once again, behind the walls, especially in our HVAC area. It's a building that really is in desperate need for a complete rehab. In that, for those of people in our community that have been in the building, certainly in those late spring, early fall months, it is something that it certainly is required. So that's a priority for us. As we talked about earlier, Edison continues to be a priority for us. It's one of our more dynamic facilities because of the size of it. We are focusing in on Phase 1, 2, and now Phase 3. And we are looking at putting a lot more emphasis on our core CTE programming, as our Chief Academic Officer alluded to earlier. There are still significant amount of infrastructure work that we need to do in that building, and we also have to balance that some of our site work with. It is in an industrial area, so if we're looking to do some athletic fields, which I know is a priority for that community, we have to balance that what our capacity is there as well. So that's one of those give and take conversations that we're going to have moving forward. The Franklin campus, although we had I would not say a small renovation, but we did do a renovation of the auditorium space, a historical landmark here in the city of Rochester. The building is probably also, much like Edison and East, one of the largest facilities in New York State, and also one of the oldest facilities in New York State. Like School 16, this will be a very ambitious project for us to undertake. And it will also certainly require more than likely multiple phases in order to bring it totally to completion. A refresh on the front end, and mechanical systems on the back end. Our goal, if you've looked at Monroe from phases 1 and 2, is to have that building look as Monroe does, where we have the historical significance, but also all the amenities on the inside of the school. Monroe, which was a Phase 1 and 2 project, has one more piece to the puzzle. We have our window replacement, which we were not able to accomplish in phase 2. That will be the final piece of the puzzle in phase 3. And then we are going to have some deliberations with, as a community about putting a pool in at that campus, which we've discussed earlier. They had a pool originally in the building. We had that pool, infrastructure-wise, that reached end of life. So we've set a space on the back of the building at our common area entrance for that to be kind of adjacent to where the gymnasium is, and that'll be a deliberation that we'll have in the coming months. And Wilson Commencement Academy, it's a building that has not been touched yet in phases 1 or phases 2. Once again, much like Franklin, a very old and wood frame structure. It has had some modernization, some renovation done. We did put a gymnasium and some other, an addition on that previously, but the primary core of the building is in desperate need of refresh. Starting from the roof and working our way all the way down to the basement. Everything needs to be touched. The classrooms need to be revitalized. So this is, once again, much like Franklin, a very ambitious project for us to undertake, but it is a fixture in our community and one of the anchors in that area of the city. So our timeline, as we've kind of talked discussed with the Board of Education, we have met every benchmark to date. We have accomplished our test fits. We've had our initial session was in June when the board gave us permission to start the initiative. We had work sessions in July, August, September. We have one later this evening, and we'll have one in November. Those work sessions, we've been able to outline, provide a status report, and be able to provide an initial set of schools at our September meeting. At our work session tonight, the superintendent will be working with the board and presenting another set of schools for us under consideration as we move forward. Also, we've met our benchmarks in terms of our public hearings, the last one being this evening, as Dr. Peluso mentioned earlier. The key date on this, which is the Board of Education and I have had some very direct conversations over the past several months, is December 22nd is a non-negotiable. We need to decide on December 22nd what buildings we're going to modernize in phase 3. We've made great progress in that regard. We're hoping to provide a rough draft of our report to the Board of Education in mid-November. We're targeting November 14th. That'll give our board plenty of time to do a complete deliberation throughout those next few weeks to make a final decision at the December meeting, and then we may add other conversations as necessary. So at this point, our community engagement aspect, I'm going to introduce our Chief Communications Officer, Ms. Marisol Ramos-Lopez, and she'll take it from here.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. We are now moving into our public hearing portion. We do have one speaker that is joining us via Zoom. His name is Anthony McCabe. Mr. McCabe, are you with us? Thank you. So as Mr. McCabe joins us, we would like to offer an opportunity for our community to provide feedback on their thoughts on the FMP process. You can go to our website, www.rcsdk12.org/FMP hearings, where you'll be able to see this presentation and prior work sessions with the board. After these sessions are completed, we will have an email available, which is fmpfeedback@rcsdk12.org, where you can send your written comments regarding the FMP process. Good evening, Mr. McCabe. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Anthony McCabe. I'm a science teacher at Franklin Upper High School, and I'm writing to advocate for a few additions to the plans for Franklin's remodel. I was personally very happy and excited to see the plan changes for our school after decades of neglect. For example, I teach a Regents level science course with a lab requirement in a science lab where none of the 8 student sinks work, and nor do the drains, none of the gas lines work, nor do the majority of the outlets. This is typical of many of the labs in the building. Though this makes running a science class difficult, teachers always manage to make things work for our students. But I know I can speak for the staff at Franklin that we're very much looking forward to an updated and fully functional building. Most specifically, a heating system that works properly in all parts of the building, and the addition of a central air conditioning unit to prevent our classrooms from reaching 85+ degrees on the 3rd and 4th floors during the beginnings and ends of the school year and in summer school. We're also looking forward to the addition of many CTE programs that our students have been begging for. that look to be planned for our school, including cosmetology, health and careers, robotics, and culinary, so that Franklin can become the school that students are excited to come to and not one with the sadly earned reputation of neglect and then subsequent dysfunction. So as a science teacher, I particularly wanted to request the addition of a new greenhouse. We currently have a greenhouse in one of our courtyards, but it's very old. Certain parts of it don't work. And more importantly, it doesn't get full optimal sunlight because of where it's located. And I was hoping we could utilize more of our fourth floor rooftop space, specifically to have a rooftop greenhouse and potentially for other uses on the roof. Not only would this provide better location for sunlight, it would also provide our school with another location to view the city from the top of the building. We currently have one room on the fourth floor that provides an amazing view of our downtown skyline, even from the northeast quadrant of the city and the trees that surround the Franklin campus. With the addition of more rooftop utilization, this could provide an incentive for students to earn greenhouse access, expand our greenhouse club, and potentially be a push toward greater interest in the STEM fields by our students while providing a special place in the building that students can enjoy. I'd also like to advocate for small dedicated rooms and alternate placement settings throughout the building where students can go or be brought for short breaks in the event of acute crisis to de-escalate situations that any 14 to 18-year-old might have in high school and that currently too often end up in suspension. I know we have a few years before this vision becomes a reality, but I hope the community can once again begin to appreciate the northeast quadrant of the city and recognize Franklin for what it is. A beautiful 100-year-old building with character and class, filled with intricate wood and marble design, and an auditorium that rivals most private performing art spaces, that was once recognized as the largest school east of the Mississippi when it was built in a long gone era of serious national reverence for public education. So I'm excited to leave Franklin's recent past behind for an exciting future that our city students deserve. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We appreciate your feedback. And again, I'd like to share the email for our families, our students, and our staff to provide feedback to us, and that's fmpfeedback@rcsdk12.org. I'll now turn it over to Superintendent Peluso.
Thank you all. At this point, that will conclude our public hearing, and we will be entering in a couple of minutes into our board work session where we will do another update on FMP. So thank you all for joining us this evening.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Elliott. This is the Board of Education, President of the Board. We are here tonight in a work session to review another phase of our Facilities Modernization Program, Phase 3. This is an update, and I'm going to turn it over to Interim Superintendent Dr. Carmine Peluso to provide the presentation for us. And just want to mention also that we have Commissioner Malloy, who's on Zoom, and also we have Vern Connors, who serves on the FMP board. They're joining us by Zoom. So thank you, welcome. Dr. Peluso?
Good evening, President Elliott, Vice President LeBron, Board Commissioners, families, students, staff joining us on social media. Today, we're going to give an update on the work from our previous meeting last month regarding FMP Phase 3 and where we currently are. So during today's work session, we're going to give an overview of 6 additional candidates, and in front of you, you should have a book that kind of outlines some updated floor plans and some updated information for each of the buildings that we will be discussing tonight. Just mention that East High School is not in this book, but we're going to finish and complete our Phase 3 work at East High School for what was begun in Phase 1 and Phase 2. I'm going to share some of the decision points we're talking about and looking at when we're looking at the remaining buildings. We're going to talk about the academic connections to the buildings, and then once again reinforce and reiterate the timeline for the process and where we are. And remember, this is in addition to the 5 buildings that we had presented last meeting of Franklin, the Douglas campus, Edison, Monroe, and Wilson. And we just had, prior to this work session, another hearing sharing that information with the community. So when we talk about criteria for decision-making, one of the big impacts going to be to the $475 million approved in this legislation is going to be the cost of the projects, right? And we know that costs are increasing, costs are rising every single day. So the team is working diligently to get costs associated or approximate cost for us to bring back at the November meeting along with demographics. But when we look at the criteria for decision-making, what we're going to talk today is about the alignment to the core model. And remember, in August of '29, we went through what a core model was, shared some of the resources in terms of what's the classroom, what's the student, what's the student enrollment, what's the spaces needed in a core model. We want to look at equity across school zones. Some of the buildings that you'll see today are across the 3 school zones, but we also want to be aware of the work that had happened in FMP 1 and 2, and which zones that work happened in order to make sure that we're being equitable across our zones to all our families and all our students so that they have access to high-quality buildings and high-quality resources within the building. Building condition, we'll talk a little bit about the building's condition in terms of what is able to be renovated and what would take some larger renovations to make happen. Programmatic decisions, and then once again, the grade level configuration. If you remember, as you all remember, we went pre-K 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, that impact on grade level configurations. So just to kind of we're talking all elementary buildings today. And that core model in elementary building really is, outlines the classroom space, any of the special education modifications needed, science labs and prep areas in our elementary schools, the art and music facilities, instructional support spaces, community partner and parent spaces, including those and making sure our buildings have those supports, the health clinics and nurse spaces as well, physical education spaces, maker spaces, also really looking at innovative spaces for our students to be creative and use some of those next-generation learning skills, administrative spaces, cafeteria, library, as well as building central services, our maintenance spaces, and other places for them. So I'm going to invite our Chief Academic Officer up to really just briefly talk about the academic connections, and then we will go through each of the buildings.
Yeah, it's on. All right, so thank you. I'm honored to share the academic connections to the proposal that will really create state-of-the-art schools and facilities in our CSD. So first and foremost is the flexible classrooms to support students and programs, including special education and English language learners. Specialized programming such as Montessori, expeditionary learning, international baccalaureate, and problem-based learning across zones. Maker and innovation spaces to maximize the implementation of our newly adopted Amplify Science curriculum, and also aligned to science, technology, engineering, and math that will help leverage some of the options for students to explore in middle and secondary in CTE courses. Art and music rooms that allow for movement, drumming, and instrumental and choral groups. Instructional spaces for intervention teachers, counseling groups, and restorative circles, along with community partner spaces for help zones and other social emotional learning initiatives. And then gymnasiums, cafeterias, and auditoriums large enough to accommodate classes and ensure we have state-of-the-art facilities. Thank you. I will turn it over to the Chief Operating Officer, Mike Schmidt.
So before Chief Operating Officer Schmidt takes over, now in front of you, we will go through each of the buildings. You have some floor plans in front of you. As we look at that core model, right, nothing is going to be clean, especially when we're working within an existing building. When our team went through the core model, they really looked at, what they could do to maximize student learning to the extent of what we would see if we really built a brand-new school. The core model kind of tries to fit that in each of these floor plans. So there's a little bit of sacrifice that sometimes has to be made to fit these. So as we go through, you'll see the floor plans in front of you, and I'm just going to turn it over to Chief Operating Officer Schmidt.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to take you on a little journey this evening. We've got some elementary schools to debut this evening for all of you to get at least an initial consideration and a look at. We're going to start in the northwest zone with school number 34. As Dr. Peluso pointed out, we have, you'll see some consistencies and some variables with each of these sites. Consistency-wise, there's a 3-strand elementary school. It is, as I said, located in the northwest zone. There are significant site challenges to the building on Lexington Avenue. There are 2 transportables. There is a playground that's adjacent to it and a parking lot, and that pretty much is the site. So with a renovation project there, we're going to have to really be strategic and creative in regards to how we're going to overlay some of the priorities we have in the core model with that building and the attributes. One of the priorities, though, is it's embedded and located in a community where a lot of our students actually live, and in a zone where we actually need the seats. So we have to try to find a balance between the need of the seats and some of the deficiencies in the building, and try to figure out how we're going to maneuver that. Some of the other things that we have as a board, priority-wise, the kitchen there is very small, and now we have a priority for full cooking kitchen, so there's going to be some mental gymnastics with that, certainly. And then, as we said, our priority to move our transportables and move our children as much as possible inside the building. We've not renovated a building and left the transportables there, and that certainly would not be a priority in this phase as well. As I said, large walking population, that certainly has been a priority for us to move our students off of transportation dependency. So that also provides us that attribute as well. Our next school in the northwest zone is school number 42. Once again, another 3-strand building that we have. Much different site than school 34 in a sense that we have an awful lot of green space around the building, and also several large parking areas, a large bus loop that we can take advantage of with in our renovation program. Some of that is some of the strengths. The classrooms are actually pretty well sized, so we have some strengths there to build from. One of the real detriments in the building, or drawbacks, I guess, within the building would be the cafeteria is very, very undersized. It is located on the lower floor, and it's got a very low ceiling, and for a school that size, to move that number of students through for a lunch period is not simple to do. It's also not a full-service cafeteria. So there's going to have to be some work in terms of trying to find a balance between where, if we and invest in that facility, try to find a location for a cafeteria, try to balance that with some of the other academic needs. But you do have a large space with which to work from there. So there are some real positives on that site. Moving to the South Zone, we have two candidates here. The first candidate is number 3 school. Number 3 school currently is a 7-8. We are projecting that as a pre-K 6. It is one of the buildings that can fully accommodate, for the most part, our core model. It is an expansive building, certainly tied to the Adams Street Rec Center. It is in zone proximity to schools 2 and 4. It is our South Zone, for the attributes of some of the facilities, has a surplus of seats. So us trying to find a balance academically of how we utilize our strongest facilities in an area where we are not where we are short seats is going to be something we're going to have to work through as a district in terms of our prioritize, whether it's the utilization of citywide schools or other priorities like that. But we have more work to be done certainly there. The one area that we really need to focus on there with the size of that school is the kitchen. The kitchen is also very undersized, but we do have the capacity to grow out that area, and with the goal of putting in a full size or full cooking kitchen setup. Once again, incredibly large footprint, and dynamic park spaces, and certainly the R Center is a real attribute for our instructional program. That where we have partnered the R Centers with our schools, it gives our students access to pools and full-size gymnasiums, and certainly another real attribute. Number 3 school is it's air conditioned. School number 34 and school number 42 are not air-conditioned facilities. So that would be another area where we'd have to invest look to invest our resources for our year-round programming. The final school in the South Zone, is school number 19. Very similar to school number 3 in the sense that it has the ability to accommodate most of our core model initiatives. It is similar to school 3 in a sense that it's in an area where we have a surplus of seats. School 2, school 29, school 4, Wilson Foundation, school 3 are all located kind of in that area of the city. So we have to once again balance some of our academic planning around where we do have our strongest facilities. The attachment to the R Center is certainly of significance, and there's a large park space below that goes up against Jefferson Avenue, which is also a real attribute for that campus. We have certainly some needs inside the building. One of our priorities for our kindergarten and preschool spaces is having the bathrooms in the classrooms as much as possible. So that's going to be something we really need to address. There are certainly some core areas in the building that we need to modernize. But the attributes of the buildings, in a sense, outweigh some of those detriments. The hybrid kitchen was an initiative we took on as a capital project, so we may look to expand that, but it is fully functioning and provides the hot meals for students now. So hybrid kitchens are a great answer for us. They are very cost efficient. They are very efficient in terms of utilization of staff. So when we can find that balance with a hybrid kitchen versus a full service kitchen, we really need to look closely and take advantage of that. Certainly, one of the academic focuses is our arts program, and it has the capacity space-wise to really embrace that. And it's once again in a walkable area of the city in terms of location to our neighborhoods. School number 9, transitioning now to the Northeast Zone. It is a fixture in our community for a whole variety of reasons on Clinton Avenue. It is currently fits our 4-strand, so it's a very large elementary school on a very small site. It has an R Center attached to it, which provides our students an awful lot of access to, as I said, the pool, gymnasium, and some other areas there. It's one of the largest R Centers in the city. It does have a hybrid kitchen, so one of the that we recently did in a CIP project. So one of the decision points there is the expansion of that versus some of the academic spaces. The ability to grow that building, to put an addition in that building, is very limited with the nature of some of the areas that are around it, the Coca-Cola plant, the church, and some of the other areas. So accessing more space may be a challenge for us, certainly. And one of the academic priorities there is certainly to maintain the bilingual program, which Ms. Jackson, if we did not mention that this evening, Ms. Jackson would already be texting my cell phone, making sure that I mentioned that. So it is one of the gems in our community and certainly one of our focuses. And finally, which, once again, our northeast zone, much like our northwest zone, has a need for seats. So when we have buildings like this, we really need to kind of focus on our area to make sure we renovate as many seats as possible in those zones, which is going to bring us into some deliberation and decision-making. School number 39 has some similarities, much to school number 34, in the sense that it's a good-sized building, but on a very small site, embedded in the neighborhood, right? So we would need to do some significant renovations to accommodate a 3-strand with a sufficient core model. The gym, stage, kitchen, main office suite, health suite, all those are undersized in that building. So the refresh there is going to be would provide us, our architects and engineers, probably some challenges in order to match that. But as I said, one of the real positives is a large majority of our students live in that northeast zone, and we want to try to keep as many seats there as possible for students to maintain that zone, maintain our transportation integrity, as we've been working as a team on for the past several years. The other part of it, 34, has this very similar situation with very limited parking. So our staffing needs for a school with a 3-strand model, if we look to do any expansion of that site, would come at the need of some parking challenges as well. So a lot of work there to be done in terms of kind of fine-tuning that site and moving us into a better position to renovate that. I think, once again, we're looking at, the core model as being aspirational in some areas, and for us to try to find a balance versus our needs for seats and capacity and zones, and try to figure out where the best way to strategically spend our resources. As I would transition back to Dr. Peluso to kind of bring us up to speed in terms of where we are with our timeline.
So just before we open it up to some questions, some discussion, just want to remind everyone on our timelines and opportunities for input, right? So today is another update from FMP regarding the work that's been happening over the month, and then November 14th, which isn't too far away. We're, about a week away from November, which is really hard to believe, but we will be bringing back a select short list for Phase 3 candidates, and really want to make sure that if there's any input from the schools that you heard today, that you provide that to us this evening. November 14th to December 22nd, we'll receive the demographic information and the cost estimates of these buildings, right? The work and the magnitude of the work is really going to be determined once we have the cost estimates and the figures. December 22nd would be the vote for the select buildings to be included in Phase 3. And then December through March, it would be the preparation of the final plan to be submitted to NYSED, and final Board of Education approval for Phase 3 master plan and Phase 3 financial plan. And then January through July is a continued engagement in the community. We really need to look at our buildings after these are decided. What do the rest of our buildings look like? What do our schools look like? What's the transition of a pre-K 6, 7, 8, and 9, 12 look like as a district? And then also, having some conversations around what we are expecting and want for our children in buildings. I want to be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to talk about the importance of keeping the focus on providing high-quality instruction to our students as the major focus when we have these discussions. And that would be a January to July conversation. And then April 3rd would be the submission of Phase 3 master plan and Phase 3 financial plan to NYSED, and submission of Phase 3 plan to the Office of the New York State Comptroller. So that concludes our month's update, and we'll open it up to any questions.
So thank you, Dr. Peluso. I'll start with Commissioner Malloy on Zoom. Commissioner Malloy, do you have any questions to the superintendent or Chief Schmidt?
None at this time. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Commissioner Adams, do you have any questions? Thank you. Commissioner Simmons?
No questions, just more of a comment regarding school number 42. Just after a few visits there, That the cafeteria, I'm happy to hear that as part of the dialogue. And again, these are pieces that we may feel are so insignificant, but they make a huge difference for the school communities. So I'm happy to hear that. And I'm looking forward to learning more about what those maker spaces will look like in our buildings as we try to get comprehensive learning pieces in place for our students. Thank you.
Vice President LeBron?
I do have some questions, and pardon me, I'm like multitasking, but trust me, this is how I also retain information. But I do have two kind of questions today regarding what's been presented so far. In regards to art and music, that actually has come up in some of the early budget conversations now. And our CFO also kind of planted the seed that we really should be talking about budget priorities in multiple years. And being that art and music is going to be one of those topics discussed next week, just curious as to know we're creating spaces for art and music, and that there is some cross-collaboration between teaching and learning and FMP this year that we haven't had in the past. With that being put into the rooms, is there a commitment to also ensure that every school has a full-time music and art teacher minimally to provide those services to students? And I say that because what I hope to not see is that we're investing physical building space into art and music, and then they only have like a 0.25 teacher. Like, that doesn't make sense, because then that room won't get utilized the way that it should be utilized, or those spaces. So I'll leave at that question, let you answer that one before I go to the next one.
So I just want to reiterate that when we submit the core model, when we submit the FMP plan, any things that we're doing within the building need to have that educational component and educational plan with it. And that's where the tie between what is happening with this set of FMP is that we're working hand in hand. When we make the decisions around academics in the art and music, what we put in the core model, there's going to have to be an educational explanation in terms of programming and what that's going to look like and why we're doing that. And that won't be just for the schools that are being renovated. That's going to be our commitment to the whole district.
Right, so when will we see that plan, that level of detail? Because that's kind of what this is like high level, and I appreciate this, and this is good for the community, but understanding the nuances of what a 0.25 versus one FTE committed just to art and one FTE committed just to music, as far as, I can't even speak tonight, as part of the full plan, if you will, the details of it, the meat. When will we see that?
And that will come once we get to some projected enrollment and the demographic section in terms of, how many students are going to be in a building, what the needs are, and what that would look like. Once again, if there's a board priority that goes beyond what is projected, then that would have to be budgeted for within the plan. But we will bring forth with the projected enrollment, how many kids are in there, K-6 building, what the instructional model looks like for art and music per se, phys ed as well, and library as well, in terms of what that garners with the number of students. If there's a 0.8, because that's what the projected enrollment is, and there's a commitment we've made to it that it needs to be a 1.0, that's what we've done right now with ARP. That's how we're funding it with our ARP money. That would be a discussion that we would have to have as a budget to make sure that that is included in all of those buildings.
Yeah, I just point that out because if we're creating space, like you put here, instructional space, art and music rooms to allow for movement, drumming, instrumental and choral groups. It makes no sense if there's no actual person to ensure that students have access to use the space full-time, on a full-time basis, and ongoing basis. The other thing I just want,
Could I just add into that?
Yeah.
But what I want to be kept in mind is that that may be our current situation, but we're building buildings that are going to be here for decades, so there will be various uses for that space. So that may be our condition now, but Vice President, I just wanted you to keep in mind that there will be other purposes for those spaces in addition to what our current situation is right now, so.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point, but also if we're intentionally putting art and music space, we should be ensuring that there's proper funding so that they're utilized, because we do have some spaces that were created and then not used or with the intentionality it was created for. But that goes back to, goes to my second question is so let me just say, I don't personally feel like you answered a timeline for me, so if you could just hone in on a timeline of when you think we'll get the details of that. I know that this has to go to the state eventually, and we have to decide on it, so when will we have conversations about the details before it goes to the state? You don't need to give me an exact date, I just need a timeline.
Yeah, before we could submit this you're looking at a December timeline for us to have a educational plan that's associated with the submission for this document.
Perfect, thank you. Just want to make sure it's on my radar and that, we kind of spaced out some time to really go through it and read it and add to it. But the second question, which you just kind of touched on, because you said, hey, it's regarding projected enrollment, was what is going to be the ideal enrollment for the reconfiguration of schools? Like, I don't think I have a good sense of what that looks like, because I know you just mentioned school number 9 and that it's a large elementary, and it is. And then I think of like school 33 across the way and how they have like 1,100 students, if not more, which is insane, right? Because like, that's a large number of students. But then, I've said this before, so this is nothing new. When we talk about our high schools and even our junior high schools as we merge out, we are struggling to have some control with the number of enrollment in some of these schools now, to then add even more students to the mix. Like, that makes me very nervous. So I'm just trying to understand or get a sense of what is the enrollment, ideally, a good enrollment number for the schools. If you have that now, maybe you don't, but that is something that I would like us to kind of process and have a better understanding of what will be ideally for an elementary school, a junior high school, a high school, how many students should be enrolled in those schools?
So in the schools we're looking at today, right, the core model will dictate the number of students in the building, right? So if you're looking at a core model, when we talked today about 34 is a 3-strand building today. If 34 had gone through FMP, it would be a 2-strand model based on what we've identified as the core model. That will then dictate that school's enrollment. So the strands dictate the enrollment. So if you go back to our core models and the core models that we presented in all these schools, you'll get the projected enrollment in those buildings for that school based on the number of strands and the population.
Just one quick follow-up to that, because then that triggers another question. So if school 34 you just mentioned has 3 strands, and I know we've gone to other schools. We were just at school number 4 last Wednesday. They said they had 1 strand. There have been other schools where we've gone and they said, hey, we got reduced to 1 strand. We wanted to order a school with 2 strands. As part of your core model, do you have a number of strands that, like you're saying, this is part of the core model? Every school is going to have 2 strands or 1 strand, or is there a model for around the core model conversations to have strands?
Could you just explain what the strands are?
Yep.
Yeah,
So-
that's a good point. So thank you, President Elliott.
So the core model is what needs to be included instructionally in a building. And a strand is a grade level, a section of a grade level. So if you have 2 first-grade classrooms in a building, that would be a 2-strand building. If you had 3 first-grade classrooms, that would be a 3-strand building. There is optimal numbers that you would like to get to in strands to maximize full-time staffing, right? So if you have, the number of strands you get to will help you with identifying staffing in a building, right? When you get to a 2-strand or some 1-strand buildings, then that impacts the number of art, music, PE teachers that are needed for the program in that school. Once we're all done with figuring out what level of buildings we're doing and what the strands are doing, then we have to then look at the district's footprint, right? So yes, that's when we start to maximize other buildings based on what is our district footprint, what is our need based on seats, in each zone and what are some of the decisions that we have to make. And that's where that conversation is, that's when on January to June of this year, we need to have some real conversations with the community as a board, as a group around, here's the number of seats in a school, in a zone, here's the number of schools in the zone, what do we want to do? Because that's directly impacting how many strands a school has. If we expand our footprint so large, then that's going to impact the building. And I will also say it also impacts our ability to provide resources to schools adequately in terms of certified teachers. If we're spread too thin and and we have sections across the city, that impacts who's instructing our kids. So all of those discussions, once we have our buildings, is going to be then, here's the size of the schools, here's the size of our footprint, this is the size of what we need. What are our decisions that we have to make as a group, as a community, and as a whole that we can get behind.
Thank you. Commissioner Patterson, do you have any questions?
No questions, just you're doing a great job, Mike, and, with your team tonight, so I just wanted to say that.
All right, thank you. Dr. Jallo, you have any questions? All right, I'm going to come back to Commissioner Simmons. She has a question.
Yeah, just really quickly, last night, myself and Commissioner Adams had an opportunity to hear from some of the public that was present for the FMP introduction, and there were some pieces around, and I know we can't do everything for everyone, but there were some pieces about the sports footprint and the fields and things of that nature, so I'm interested to hear, and I know that would be down the line. But what you were talking about right now, Superintendent Peluso, regarding the grade level reconfiguration, I know we touched on that last night, and I implore and like the idea that you are trying to approach this with the most or the least intrusive approach. And so what you just described for Vice President LeBron, forgive me, I'm a little tongue-tied this evening, would that approach that we discussed yesterday still be the approach as far as that the focus on the 7-8? The way you expressed that last night was really helpful for me. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, so I think once we're making a transition to pre-K 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, right, we have some transition points, right, that are going to be harder than others, right? So if I'm a pre-K 6, I naturally transition to a 7, 8 building. If I'm a 8th grader, I naturally transition to a ninth grade building. Our 7th and 8th grade buildings are something we have to have a conversation about in terms of how do we transition those students? Do we transition them all at once? Do we transition a student to 8th grade that are in 7th grade and transition them to a new school just for 8th grade? I think those are the conversations that I want to get with the community about and receive some feedback and include that in our proposal when, we come back in the January to June timeframe.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. I was just, when I was meeting with the Vice President earlier today, I talked about safety measures, particularly as it relates to, there was a shooting at St. Louis, and for some reason that one just really got in my gut, and so because I had I was thinking that the shootings were taking place in the suburbs and they weren't necessarily taking place in urban districts. And so is there in this plan greater safety measures? Is there some more technology that can be included installed in these schools that make it more difficult for people or weapons to enter into these new facilities?
Sure. I think certainly the focus is hardening the targets. I mean, certainly trying to make it as difficult as possible for somebody who does not have the good intentions to get into a school building, but also still making it welcoming as a school building, just trying to find that balance. That's certainly one. I think we also approach it with technology, upgrading our camera system so that it's more than, so we have the ability to identify people in exterior of our campuses to make sure that anybody around there is not someone that we have to be concerned about, so to speak. There's that level of security. So there's certainly some physical areas that we can do. And then there's also some certainly on the inside of the building where we need to look at our classroom setup so that if we have, God forbid, something like that happen in a building, that we have the ability to secure every single classroom. There are some things I don't want to discuss tactics, so to speak, too much publicly until we have some more of the details, but that is a number one priority for us is safety of our students and staff. And I think as we also have some initiatives to bring forward in terms of some utilization of some art funds. We've had 3 trainings with a member of the New York State Troopers who have done an active shooter training for our staff, and that's been very well received, very informative. And there's, like I said, there's strategy that we can do inside the building, outside the building, and we need to. It's not just one particular area, but hardening the target is the priority for us when we look at the buildings and going into phase 3 as it was in phase 2. So I think everyone, the buildings that we've done in phase 1 and phase 2 have a more enhanced security system that we can build on if we need to, and I think that's how we would approach in phase 3.
And to School 9, where there was a relationship with Baden Street, School 9, and the city of Rochester, that relationship has changed. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit challenging, the relationship between School 9 and the rec center at this point. And so I'm wondering if they're in School 9 is where it is because of the work that Baden Street was able to do to help in that regard to get them off the receivership. And I'm sure that Principal Jackson will want to have some conversation as we move into renovating that space in light of the fact that there are challenges using some of the space at the rec center and for the work that Baden Street does and the Office of Children and Family Services regulations that has to be adhered to, that there probably is going to be, you all have some conversation around that and how you can make that relationship work. Because if Baden is not able to provide that program, or this community loses around $500,000 in that community. And so we don't want that funding to leave. And so if there's that conversation with those bodies, that would be great to try to see what we can do to.
Without question. I think you bring up 2 excellent points. I think the access of community partners to our buildings is a priority, as we have shared in the core model, so I think we can replicate that. You mentioned number 9 as the example, but there's others certainly there. I think also the interface with building leadership and teachers and students and community members, that's a key piece of this, right? So, this is really step 1, and when we get down to, identifying specific needs of specific buildings, that's when, Principal Jackson and her team and the others that will have much more input in terms of the type of program we put in, the type of space and that type of thing. And then there's a balance, right? We want to make sure that it's that
there is
wherever that is, but that's that key piece. So I know that Principal Jackson probably has already texted me, and so I'll be responding to her this evening, but certainly that's like, when can I have an input? And I think right now we're trying to look at very high levels of cost and try to, look at it a more broader scope. And then once we get down to the more, when we have an idea of our MCA, maximum cost allowance at that building, and then, where our parameters are, and then we'll engage the communities. The other part of it, President Elliott, is where it comes on the list, right? The order of operations in terms of how we renovate the schools, which one goes first. I think that also goes a long way into when we would engage a building and so forth.
And then just one last remark that I'd like to make, and to make it to our listening audience and to those who are in this room. We have $475 million, right? Just $475 million. And so we have to look at, so there's constraint. And we have to look at what, in light of COVID, what the rise in costs will be. There are a lot of situations around, cost and, what things cost these days. And also, the supply chain issues. And so we have to take all of those things into consideration. And so that may also determine, the amount of work that we can do in each one of these schools because of the supply chain issue, because of rising costs. I was talking to somebody, in my job at Community Place, where, the cost, and with the city, where the cost we were quoted was $300,000 for a particular product and work to be done, it's now $800,000. So we're talking about, it raised $500,000. And so just want to keep our community, alert our community, warn our community that, the state is only going to give us a certain amount of dollars, $475 million. There may be rising costs, meaning that there may be some things that we can do, some things we may not be able to do because of those rising costs. So I just wanted to make sure I put that on the table. So, all right. Any other questions? All right, hearing none. Yeah,
So can I just close
Sure.
out with
Oh, yep.
one thing? So
absolutely.
I just, I want to just kind of focus us a little bit for one other factor here, right? We have the 5 that we've talked about. We had East in there as well, and the submission to finish the work of Phase 1, 2, and 3. Like President Elliott just said, money is going to be, we're going to have to see what our dollars get us in this project. But I do want to, as we're deciding, you have a lot of buildings in here in front of you, right? That we're not going to, we're not going to be able to get to all of these, and we're not going to get to some of these that are currently we looked at today. But I want to ask, as I start to plan and I bring the schools in front of you next month, right, is zone equity an area in a direction that I should be looking at as my decision maker so that we have equity in schools? Because we do have, I want to bring that criteria forward if that's something that we do. If that's not important, that may change what school I bring forth in November.
All right, so let me go with, let me ask each.
Can we get clarity on what you mean by zone equity?
Yes, so, thank you for that, Vice President LeBron. So the number of buildings that have already gone through FMP phases 1 and 2, and then the numbers of buildings that have not. So there's some buildings here that we looked at that are in, let's say, the south zone that has been heavily gone through the FMP phase, right? And there's some schools in the northwest that have not gone through the FMP phase, right? So that may be a decision maker when I look at it, and then the number of seats within those zones as well. So if there's pros and cons to all these buildings, is zone equity an area that we want to focus in terms of making the maybe 1 building or 2 buildings left that we have to decide on once we get the cost allowances?
All right, so I'll start. Commissioner Patterson, would you like to react to what the superintendent just said?
For me personally, I'm looking for recommendations from Mike and the team, but I think you should finish the ones that were in Phase 1 and Phase 2, in Phase 3, and then start on the other ones. So that would be my advice.
All right, Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. I would like us to consider zone equity, but I also want us to consider what is it that we're building? What's our overall or overarching goal for our students? What do we want to create for them? How do we build a better community? I just want to keep those types of ideas in the forefront as we move forward. But yeah, equity is something we should always be focused on.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Commissioner Adams?
So, zone equity sounds good, it really does, but one of my concerns is that things that you're going to look at in order to prioritize the buildings, will you be considering where they're at in standing? Is the building in good standing? Is the school in good standing? As opposed to a school that ain't in good standing? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about?
So when I talk about FMP, I'm talking about buildings, not particular schools, right? What has the, right, so we're going to need schools in those. When we get to reconfiguration or how that looks, that's a different conversation about what buildings may stay, which schools may stay, which schools may not. But when we're looking at this, we're looking at the building bones in essence, right? What is a good building to keep in our inventory as a district for years to come in the location of where it is? Not so much the exact school title to that.
Okay, so this is another concern of mine. So are we going to be able to look at and see the cost on each of these buildings? Because we're already saying that this money that we're getting may not be sufficient because of the rising prices. So are you going to take into consideration that one of these schools has absolutely no parking space, and it would cost a whole lot more money? And so that should play into my vote. It will play into my vote because we have to be fiscally responsible.
So if in our earlier conversations and work sessions, the rough draft, so to speak, that you'll receive at our November meeting, and then if we have to do some subsequent revisions early in December, that will be the core of that. Our best estimate in terms of cost analysis and how we can maximize the use of $475 million. And when we come back on the 14th, we may have buildings that shake out because we just can't. If we were to go and touch them, we would not be able to really do it justice. So we may have to come up with a different strategy in terms of that. So that cost analysis is essential. This allows us to kind of guide and focus our work over the next several weeks in order to kind of bring back a product that will meet all the different expectations. And then at that meeting, if we don't have enough yet for us to make some informed decisions, then we have from the 14th of November all into December for us to continue to gather more information. So we're aligning the building condition survey, our best estimates in terms of what the cost in terms of our renovation of the building, and then some of the other broader scopes that Dr. Peluso was talking about in terms of seat capacity and that type of thing. So it's not a simple one-lane answer here, but you're absolutely right. The cost is going to be an essential part of what you're going to have on the 14th. It would not be fair to say, well, pick these 5 buildings and we'll see, and then find out in the 14th it won't fit. That's not really the focus here. It's just more to kind of give us some guiding thoughts. So I think the bigger rocks, I think, as Dr. Peluso is referring to, are a good conversation piece. But you are going to get as detailed as we can based upon that, figuring, we don't know what you don't know, right? It could actually get better for us. You could get a much better bid environment in 2025, 26. So I think that's, so we're just doing our best. We'll do our best work we can. But I think you've all been hurt. I think you're all very, one part about this is very self-aware of the fact that we're not going to be able to do everything. And I think that having that on the front end of it, I think is going to be very important, because if we have reasonable expectations here, then we can all have that same level of conversation with our community. So I think that's a key piece.
Commissioner Simmons?
Yeah, I echo those sentiments, because I, of course, have a laundry list or grocery list of things that I would love to see that make my dinner perfect, right? And the reality is, if I want a dinner to be successful, I can't necessarily get everything in the store. And so that's how I'm, trying to make sure that I'm sober-minded around how I'm thinking about this process. Just when we're considering modernization of our facilities, what is the thumbprint that will guide education in Rochester? What are the priority areas that will line us up successfully and help execute some of those academic areas that we have deficiencies in? And so if we make that our guiding light and our students the North Star, then we, I think can be successful with this. So thank you.
Vice President LeBron?
Yeah, I just want to point out, when you said zone equity, how decisions have been made in the past that have created this imbalance of the Northwest. It's I'm always going to use this because this is a real life dilemma that we put ourselves in, has only a small amount of elementary schools, no junior high school options, and it's such a large quadrant in the city, and we don't even know what's going to happen with these maps right now because there's a big map battle. So I don't know what the even lines are going to draw in terms of we don't know what that's going to look like. I'm sure it's going to end up in court and let the courts decide, but my point is we've boxed ourselves in where we only have a small amount of schools in the Northwest, and then we're kind of over inundated. Really in the Northeast we're saturated, and we have to acknowledge that we're oversaturated. And in the South zone, the Southwest is really saturated with schools, and that's just the reality. And a lot of those schools did go through FMP. So for me personally, I'm not necessarily interested in reinvesting more dollars in schools that already have been touched through FMP, because I personally believe that they can be touched with these smaller projects that they need through capital improvement over time, versus having the 475 being limited to perhaps the schools that did not get touched at all by FMP and need a significant amount of improvement. Franklin being one of those buildings, right? Franklin hasn't been touched. Anthony was right, our speaker, in decades, and we know that it's a large building. We know we've patched it as best as we could, but it really does need a lot of work, and I think the bulk of FMP money will end up having to go into Franklin, because we can't keep kicking the can, as we said, about finances, but we can't do it about the buildings and the conditions that they're in. But some of these other projects, I'd be curious about the cost. For example, East has had a significant number of projects, and the building has been invested in both phases, to then add it in phase 3, depending on the amount of money and the project itself, why that couldn't go into a capital improvement project, and again, depending on how much, why it couldn't go into their actual budget itself. So just throwing it out there, just as an example of schools, and I don't know the detail and the level of phase 1, 2 projects, and what phase 3 projects cost is going to look like and what they need. I know before it was mentioned like windows, which we know is very expensive, windows at Monroe, that never got done. I'd be curious at what the total cost of the windows to be done at Monroe would look like versus adding it into the capital improvement project, where we can utilize some of that money that we're required to spend on improvement of buildings versus the other way around, using FMP dollars. So it's just something to think about, but I would need more data, more actual numbers and the real projects to be able to really answer what your question around zone or school equity looks like in terms of FMP.
And for me, I think that equity is important, that we have similar spaces within each one of our zones that would make it, more accessible to our families, so that they don't have to, if they live in one zone, they don't have to receive services in another zone, that they can access all of their educational needs for their children within, their zone, neighborhood. I'm a big proponent of neighborhood schools. It's about having equitable resources and access, in all the zones. But I also would like to just, throw out there, this may be an opportunity. Many of you know that I'm not one that want to go to the state always asking for money, when we have not in the past done our due diligence about spending the money wisely that we've received from the state and from other resources. But this may be an opportunity to go to, say, for example, foundations, so that if Monroe is in need of windows, there may be a foundation out there that may be willing to support us in that regard. So I'm just sort of thinking out of the box about those things, that where we don't have the resources at. I do know one thing, that people don't want to just waste their money. They don't want their money to be an expense. They want it to be an investment. And this may be an opportunity for funders or somebody who may be listening who want to contribute in a significant way. Windows, for example, in Monroe, that may be an opportunity. So just because now we are pinpointing where we need some resources. Sure. This may be an opportunity. So that's just a thought. If somebody is listening that wants to give us, a few million, we'd be happy to receive it for the windows at Monroe High School. So if there's nothing else, I think that we need to go into executive session. So I'm going to ask for a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters leading to the demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person, and student matters which are confidential by federal or state law. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Moved by Vice President LeBron, seconded by Commissioner Malloy. We're going to end our meeting from downstairs, and so we want to just thank the viewing audience for participating in this work session with us. More information regarding phase 3 to come. There may be another hearing, or there will be more public hearings around phase 3. Please go on the website and to determine where those hearings are going to be and participate in the process. Thank you all, and good night.